we were just talking about why all of a sudden we were talking about why the eating to hunger is so easy, and whereas before it was so hard. And then the other thing is the need for pleasure with food. All of a sudden, something that you were very consistently wanting, which is, you said, I was always planning for thinking about what I couldn't eat, what I wanted to eat. It's like that addiction that people talk about when they say you're addicted to food. It's like before you had all of these cravings and desires and wants and were planning your cheat meals and all that stuff, right? And how all of a sudden that is gone. It's just gone, right?
It's just disappeared.
Yeah. We started talking about the fantasizing, right? About when you can't have something that you start to fantasize about getting it, right?
Exactly.
And that when you don't have something, it's almost like your mind starts to imagine and create this almost magnified idea of what it is, which is actually better than what it really is. So that for example, going to eat something, your desire for it and your thoughts about it can be more pleasurable than the actual experience of it. Right? A lot of times when people do this work, they are given the freedom to eat all this food, and there's no regulation of the food. There's no limit to the food. The food isn't going away at a future time. There's no criticism about eating the food. It kind of takes all that emotional pressure away from it. And given the access to that food, many people experience that the food isn't as good as they imagined it to be. And it's somewhat disappointing. Have you had that experience?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Actually going out for dinner and deciding what I want to have. Oh, the pizza's going to be so good. Oh my gosh. But when I was dieting, it was a mind game, because then it would be so good, but because you're fantasizing, you're making it more desirable than it really is. And then when you do eat that pizza, instead of stopping when you want because you're not hungry anymore, you're so scared about not being able to have pizza again for another week or two until your next cheat meal, you end up eating the entire thing and maybe having another one.
Mm-hmm. Because you're emotionally preparing for being deprived or for that famine. So in this moment, you've given yourself the freedom from guilt, freedom from limits, freedom from regulation. So you tend to eat more in that space than your body is actually messaging for you to eat, right? So we were also seeing that same, it's called cognitive distortion. Cognitive distortion can happen in a variety of different ways. Specific to what we're talking about, cognitive distortion is taking something that is small and making it big in your head. The other way it can happen is taking something big and making it small, right? People do it a lot in religion and politics, right? Depending on what position they're in and what they're witnessing. A lot of that is done to remove cognitive dissonance. Okay, anyways. So in terms of fantasizing about what you don't have and what you want, there's a correlation similar to that, how you fantasize about food when you're dieting or deprived of food. There's also a fantasy in terms of what you believe being thin will do for you. I had a consult yesterday with a woman who is fantasizing about when she's thinner, she's going to get a boyfriend, she's going to get married, she's going to have partnerships, she's going to have this life that she doesn't feel like she has. So what she's doing is cognitively distorting or fantasizing about what losing weight will provide her in her life, right?
I think we all do that.
We do. Because it's somewhat for our own we're seeking some type of emotional fulfillment through that fantasy. If there wasn't a need for that fulfillment, you wouldn't create the fantasy about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we feel lonely, I feel lonely. That's a very victim feeling. I'm alone. Poor me, I'm lonely, as if I'm a victim to loneliness, and loneliness is happening to me, right? That emotion can create a equally opposite fantasy about what life would be like if you had partnership or people in your life. That my life would, that feeling would go away, and then there's this pleasure in the fantasy of it. So we get pleasure when we fantasize, right, about what our life would be like. So in terms of being thinner, we had talked about how there's always this.
Obsessive.
Go ahead.
Oh, always an obsessiveness. You're obsessing and obsessing.
Chasing it, right? You're chasing this fantasy around when I'm thinner, when I reach this specific weight, whatever that weight is, when I'm 10 pounds less, when I'm 50 pounds less, when I achieve this accomplishment, when I get there, there is this euphoria to it. Like I will feel calm. I will feel confident. I can be myself. I can have my own personality. I can just be real, right? There's this real fantasy. It's the best word I can describe it with about what it's going to be like. And it's bigger in your mind than it actually is in reality. And anybody watching this video can say, I've lost weight all this many times, and each time I never reached that pearly gates that opened, and I came and I had this freedom and this space of awesomeness. It never feels that way. So the fantasy of it is far more powerful and huge than it is in reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Partly because when you're seeking something you think you don't have, you're going to create some idea of what it is that isn't necessarily taking into account all of the dynamic parts of reality. So in terms of weight loss, the fantasy does not include social isolation, the control, the issues with food that you have, the paranoia around regaining, doesn't include all of the management that you have to do in terms of keeping you safe from regaining. So you're, again, that obsession you described. The fantasy doesn't include the obsessiveness that it requires
exactly
to get there. And we look at why it's so obsessive. Well, based on what I believe and what I've studied, it's because you're conflicting with your mammal survival mechanisms by dieting, by depriving yourself of food, by omitting food choice, right? So you have to obsess to counteract that mammal survival need for food.
Mm-hmm.
Those are your cravings. That's why you're addicted to food, right? Which really isn't an addiction at all.
No.
It's how the brain's wired to survive, so it's not a problem. It's not a genetic. It's not a mess up, right? It's not a flaw. So tell me, in terms of your experience dieting and pursuing thinness or thinner than you are-ness, running away from fatness, running away from body fat, did you ever get the fantasy?
No. No, because you start to obsess. You obsess and you obsess and you obsess, and you actually never really win. You just begin to obsess more and more and more until it's like a drug that takes over your life. The pressure. There's so much pressure, like you said, of not regaining and staying at the weight you're at, because that's where you're getting compliments. But you're always going to want to be thinner than you are. If you get down from a size 6 to a 4, you're always going to want to be a 2. When you get to the size 2, you want to be a 0.
Can you explain to me why that is?
Because you start getting, what I found when I started, say I lost 10 pounds. Oh my gosh, I'm getting so many compliments from all these people that never really noticed me before. I have to keep losing more. But it's a fantasy because you're going to fantasize about being thinner and thinner and thinner. But when does it stop?
Well, don't you agree that the fantasy doesn't exist? It's totally made up in your mind, right? And it doesn't take into account reality. So when you are, because we're living in reality, right? And every single moment we're in a reality. We're in reality. In reality, I'm wearing this hat. In reality, I have no makeup on. In reality, I haven't brushed my teeth yet today. In reality, right, my armpits are sweaty. In reality, my stupid iCloud storage is keeping on bumping in on my computer. I mean, in reality, you're in Canada. In reality, we're on Skype. In reality, my daughter's in there. The reality is that we're human beings living a human experience, and the fantasy doesn't exist. It's not even in reality. It's completely created in a vacuum. I use that a lot. When I say it's in a vacuum, that means it is completely removed of dynamic influence or external influence. There's no change in reality. So for you to achieve the fantasy of thinness, right, you would have to, which means that, right, how you fantasize about what it's going to provide in your life, that would mean that you'd have to remove the insane obsession that it takes to get there and to maintain it. But if you remove that obsession, you now have to experience the inevitable fat gain of not controlling it, right? So the fantasy, when you created it in your head, didn't include that you are an indentured servant to chronically starving the rest of your life, and that you never really get the freedom to express yourself, because what you're doing is expressing your dieting in your body image.
But you know what's funny, though? When you get to be that thin and that small, you don't want people to know that you obsess about everything.
Yeah, so you're lying about it, right?
You're lying, because I remember I used to go out for dinner when I wasn't in the vacuum, when I wasn't in the bubble, when I wasn't at home, and I would eat foods that weren't on my diet, and I'd say, oh, I eat like this all the time. Oh, diet? I don't diet. And I would pretend that I didn't diet, and everyone would think that I'm normal.
Yeah, or that you have some special human powers to be, super thin.
And eat whatever I want.
Which you weren't. So you would eat out that way. Did you end up purging, diuretics, or did you just you kind of did the intermittent fasting, right? Where you would starve yourself for a day or two.
Exactly. And then I would take like fiber pills, and I would really watch my diet for the next couple days, because that was bad. I shouldn't have eaten that. But
you gotta maintain that false front. You got to maintain the thin front, right? Like, I'm a thin person. I have all these superhuman powers. I got to maintain that, because that's what people are giving me power for, or giving me praise. So as soon as I start living in reality, I got to make sure that I can cover that up, right? To make sure that my lie continues. Oh, it's so intense. Oh my God. I mean, seriously, every time I talk about it, it's like I can feel the way that was for me too. But anyways, but for me, I always dieted, and I praised my diet as if it was healthy. Like, oh yeah, I'm so in control. I'm so healthy in my fitness. I just ran like 7 miles, that's super healthy. What's wrong with you people? Lazy assholes, right? So I took on the health righteousness role with my coping mechanism, right? Anyways, so the point of this video is to kind of discuss the fantasy is all in your head, and it's all omitting reality. So here we are in recovery. Where is the fantasy now?
Gone.
It's in a fantasy. It's not in your reality, because you were thinking that fantasy was real, right?
And I'm actually, it's actually opening up my eyes to more different things in my life. Like, I always used to think how as soon as I got thin, I would never have a bad day. Oh, everything's going to be perfect. I'm going to live in this little fantasy bubble. But now that that's gone, I'm actually dealing more with healing myself too, to the point that I don't fantasize about anything anymore. Not food related, not relationship related, not friend related. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because that's you understand at this point that why would you do that when it causes obsession and controlling issues, right? That I have to control the environment. And I don't know, I think being in reality is, first of all, it takes humility to do it, right? You're not pretending anymore that you have special powers. You're not pretending anymore that you are
better than anybody else.
I was just going to say superior, better than anybody else. That type of pressure puts you at war with people that you don't even know, right? Judging people, that's a lot of work. Don't you agree? To maintain, it's a fantasy that you have this superior, you're a superior human being and you have proof, which, disconnects you. It's really disconnecting in terms of how we relate to other people. So in reality, we're all equal. We're just all learning. We're all being humans. We're all trying to get along, right? So you might feel too that you all of a sudden, now that you're not trying to create this fantasy and to present a fantasy as if that's realistic, right?
I feel like I'm not a snob anymore.
That's got to feel so relieving.
But not that I was trying to be, but now that you explain it, I feel like, wow, I was such a little snot.
Well, body image is very self-righteous. You're really trying to prove something about yourself. Even if you're morbidly obese trying to be thinner, I think it's proving something to yourself too. Like, why do you got to prove to yourself that you're a good person through losing body, or that you can handle life, right? Or you can work that hard. I don't know. There's something very self-deprecating in that process. A lot of people don't see, So when you pull yourself out of it and have the humility to let go of the fantasy, which is hard and it's sad to do it because it feels like loss. Like, oh, I'm losing the pedestal. I'm losing what makes me feel special. I'm losing people's worship and praise, and I'm losing all of this. And now I'm exposing the lie. That's the other thing you had to do to get here, is you had to be okay with the fact that the people who saw you in your thinness, and it was so easy for you, now you're exposing that was a lie.
I think that's probably why I was having a little bit of a bad day yesterday. I was kind of feeling a little bit down about, like, I was so happy that it's gone, but part of me was like, oh, well, now it's gone. It's like saying goodbye to a chapter in your life, right?
Yeah, very abusive, dysfunctional, highly charged, terrible chapter, yes. And it is sad because it's like an old identity. But do you really want that? Do you want that identity back?
No.
It comes with so much torture.
Oh, so much.
Yeah. So now you should feel like you are in reality. Like there's a reality now. It's like just telling the truth. Be yourself. Whatever that is, it shouldn't require extreme amounts of work. If whatever you're doing to be yourself takes a ton of work and obsessiveness and focus, is that really who you are?
No.
Right? If it's real, it shouldn't take that type of work. In fact, it should just exist, right?
Oh, that's so true.
Oh, yeah. It shouldn't take force. If it's real, you shouldn't have to prove it, force it, create it. It should just exist, right? Even with the body you're in, the reality of the nature and the DNA of the body you are in shouldn't take obsessive compulsive force, right? Think of all of the work that the diet industry, to include the health industry, all the work that they're promoting, should you have to work that hard to be healthy?
No. Should you have to spend an hour getting ready to go to the gym so you look good while you're working out?
Well, no. But even if you don't do that, should you have to go to the gym and do all of that work just to promote health?
No, I don't go to the gym.
You know, now, this isn't all or nothing. There is something to say for taking care of the nature of the body. Our bodies are meant to work and labor and function and walk and climb and do all these things. But should you have to do the extreme levels and degrees of work for the body to just maintain a neutral level of health?
No.
Should you have to feel good about yourself, have to do such an extreme degree of work and deprivation?
No.
It shouldn't.
No.
If it's real, right? So I came to this awareness too. Like, I'm working harder than I'm working as hard as someone who's morbidly obese trying to be thin. And I'm doing that just to maintain, right? So if this was my real physiology of which I'm presenting to the world, look at me, this is real. I'm really fit, right? I'm really healthy. I'm really lean. Well, if it was real, I shouldn't have to work that hard. So essentially, I'm working hard to present something that is real that isn't at all. It requires work.
And that's going back to that fantasy again.
Totally. That I'm presenting a fantasy. So when you go onto social media, when you get into, the before and after pictures, the idea is that they are presenting this as if this is easy and it comes naturally. Do this. Just put this, drink this shake. Just do this weightlifting exercise and look at what happens to me. So they're presenting the fantasy with a vacuum type of cognitive distortion, right? They're trying to minimize the workload. Remember when I said you're taking something big and trying to make it seem small? Cognitive distortion, right? You'll see it in food mongering, where you get fear mongering with food. 5 foods you should never eat. You go to the article and it basically is presenting this as if you're going to die of cancer and all sorts of problems if you eat this food. And they don't talk about quantities, amounts, exposure. Like, of course, if you eat kale all day long for 5 years straight, you're going to end up with cancer. So should we say you should never eat kale? Right? So they're cognitively distorting the truth. They're making something that's actually there in small amounts, making it huge, right? Going both ways, distorting it, twisting it, and trying to manipulate the reader to do what they're told, to follow, to like, to share, they're trying to get power through this stuff. I mean, it's a diet industry. It's $1 trillion industry, right? Selling their supplements, selling their programs, selling this, selling themselves. They want to be worshipped. So they're going to call it my special diet program.
And
right?
Multi-level marketing.
The multi-level marketing is huge. The diet industry is now in your best friend's home who's trying to sell you their program, right? It's no longer, in a building. It's like, let's just sell supplements and shakes and stuff.
Now it's all over Facebook and Instagram, and your friends are texting you about it.
And it's so easy because it's so natural.
No, it's not.
Even though all those people at some point are going to say, I have emotional eating problems, and they don't see the connection between the emotional eating and their emotional deprivation. And the fact that you're gambling with your psychological and emotional well-being for a fantasy that doesn't exist. Right? Anyways, it's amazing how, anybody listening to this video, think about the image in your mind of what you think being thin will do for you. You're fantasizing. That is creating euphoria, but it's not including the, how you're going to feel as a human being in deprivation, which goes against our evolutionary psychology. You're going to yearn and want food in an incredibly intense way, making the pleasure of food a fantasy, right? Going back to the fantasy of food. Oh, if I could just have a grilled cheese sandwich, that crunchy, bready, buttery deliciousness, gooey. So it becomes bigger than the actual experience itself, right?
Yeah.
We give you freedom with food, and what happened to the fantasy around food? Yeah.
It went away. And I used to be a religious grocery shopper. Oh my God, I'm almost running out of spinach. I have to go buy 2 more containers so that I have enough. I have not, today I absolutely have to go shopping because I'm like, okay, I am out of, almond milk, and, okay, I need it. Not like, okay, I'm going to go shopping and buy 6 containers of almond milk so that I make sure that I never, ever run out. My fridge is almost empty right now, and it's never been like that when I've been at home. It's usually stock piled full so that I have enough food to meal prep and do this and do that. Now,
well, to control. You're trying to control your food intake, right? Which is actually trying to control your fear of being exposed as not really superior with your thin supremacy, your health righteousness, right?
Exactly. And shopping has totally changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I still go down the healthy food aisle because those are some of the foods that I enjoy in the natural aisle. But, I mean, I go around to the rest of the store, too.
Well, don't you think the rest of the store is healthy, too? I mean, when you think about...
What is your body craving?
Yeah. Isn't that relative? It's dynamic. It's not static. We talked about that. Dynamic meaning it's changing a lot. Like the desire for pleasurable food is changing a lot. Sometimes you don't want it, sometimes you do, whereas before it was always wanting it. Always wanting it. So it was static. Because you couldn't ever have it, which was static. Right? So the craving and desire for food was always there because it was never good. Unless you compensated with some way to fix the damages and the shame that you had by eating those foods that make you less human, right? Less superior. Mm-hmm. It's just a sad way to live. Now that you have this freedom, I want you to imagine going back there. Could you imagine going back there?
No. Not unless I did want another hobby.
Right. Tell me this. Would you, if I said to you, hey, you are going to lose 15 pounds if you just go back and do this new, cleanse, this new diet.
No.
Why do you say no?
How do I explain that?
Why are you not wanting the thinner body that you could get if you just did this cleanse? You could get thinner. You could go back into that superiority. People are going to start going, what are you doing? Oh my God, look at you. Dang. Giving you all that attention.
I've actually learned to love the body I'm in now. And you told me, I think on our first session, could you love yourself at the weight you're at now and never, ever imagine or, fantasize about being thin again? You're stuck at this weight. And I learned to like myself at this weight. I have never liked myself at the weight I'm at now. And I'm comfortable in clothes I'm wearing now. I pick outfits for comfort. I mean, I want to look good too, but I mean, it wasn't just about what was hiding what I didn't want people to see before and emphasizing what I did want them to see before. And all that obsessing about food, I have so much more free time on my hands. I've been doing housework renovations and stuff for a week now. Instead of planning foods and meal prepping and shopping and cutting, and I'm just eating what I want now, and it's so much better. I feel so much more calm.
Mm-hmm. You don't have that fight or flight insanity around food.
And the anxiety that I used to have
gone.
is it's not totally gone. I still have a little bit. But
What's the little bit still there with?
Becoming 500 pounds.
Okay.
There is a little bit. Because I am finally so happy where I am now that I like it. But I don't want to be 500 pounds.
Well, what if that happens with what you're doing? I want you to think about that. When I said to you, well, if it comes naturally, that's the truth.
Yep, and then that's what'll happen, I guess. But I still have a little bit that it's going to happen tomorrow, that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and be...
Well, why don't you go into it right now? Because that means you're still holding that fear in your head, and that still is affecting you.
Yeah.
So let's go through it. I mean, let's just say that does happen. Because that's what the crazy thing is, your brain believes that could happen. Right?
Yeah.
I always say logically, most of the clients I work with are very clearly aware that when they give this up, they're not going to be binging anymore. They're not going to be obsessing. They're not going to be compensating, rocking the boat the same way. And the likelihood that that's going to happen is slim. But emotionally, it is real. I felt emotionally I was going to be 500 pounds, right? Because that's how hard I was working just to stay the same. So if I give up what I'm doing just to stay the same, I'm going to get bigger. Emotionally, that's what it feels like. And that's why I'm emotionally doing all this work, right? So we've eliminated all this work, and you have to accept that this freedom is worth keeping if it means that you have a physical ailment. And let's use ailment, because don't go into, I hope this doesn't happen. You're going to have physical limitations if you're going to be 400, 350 pounds or more. You're going to. Is it worth it? Are those physical limits worth this freedom? If that's what happens naturally to the body, you're not forcing it. You're not binging anymore. Right?
Then, I would be happy if it happened. There is this one thing. My fiance and I went to a dinner party last year. And on the way to the dinner party, my fiance was telling me about this one guy, Gord. And he was mentioning, his wife's gained so much weight. She's doubled or tripled her size. He's not even attracted to her anymore, and they're having a lot of marital problems. And I felt so bad for her that he was judging her and telling other people about his marital problems, and that stuck in my head.
Well, it sounds like they had foundational issues to start with, right? That he's not necessarily having compassion for whatever's going on.
And maybe just blaming it on the weight.
Totally. Yeah. So it's easy to see it from the outside to be like, well, she should lose weight to keep this guy. Well, actually, he's kind of the truth is coming out. He should just relieve himself, and she should go get help. Right?
Yeah.
So the thing is this, if your fiance doesn't have compassion for whatever it is that is creating the issue, do you want him in your life?
He is very compassionate.
Okay.
I think that was...
I'm saying if he wasn't compassionate for that.
Then, no.
That's what I meant. It's kind of like, for someone to physically have that happen, it's kind of like my mom, when she had brain cancer, she had to go on steroids, and she gained a ton of weight, tons of fluid, looked super different, lost a ton of hair, right? I mean, so imagine how that's going to change a relationship, right? The problem is with people who are ignorant around body image and hormonal issues is that they take it as this is a person, she's lazy. So I could actually look at that and say, oh, he's a huge part of the problem. Well, she is the source, but she's codependent with him, and he is part of the problem. So her fear of him leaving is actually going to happen. right? Which is probably why she feels so. Go back into the kind of hoarding behavior that people who have binge eating have. You know, this idea that I'm such a failure, I'm a huge piece of shit, the shame involved with the body image of binge eaters, in the fact that they, at some point in their far future life, when their life is easier and better, they will fix it. And that creates years of this stuff. And the bigger you get, the more pressure on dieting you have. That pressure on the dieting, you think you had obsessiveness. Imagine that you're 400 pounds. And think of how overwhelming that would feel in terms of how perfect you have to be with your diet for how long you have to be perfect. Right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, so when you look at the feasting behavior of that, it's very, very understandable. And no, you're not addicted to food. That's just ignorance. That's just someone not really knowing what they're talking about, trying to create some idea. It's ridiculous, right? So yeah. Go into that. I mean, honestly, do you want to be with someone who's going to stigmatize and shame you?
No. I probably fight back with something like, oh, she should try the diet that I'm on.
Well, no, I'm talking about your fear of being that big. And I thought you used her as an example of why you have that fear.
No, it is. Yeah. That she's that just kind of stuck with me. It kind of went back to when my dad said something not like that, but something similar along those lines. My dad said something like that, and maybe that kind of just struck a chord.
Well, is your dad's opinion and limited thinking where you should stay? Should you stay inside that little box of limits so that he's comfortable?
No.
Yeah. At some point, you go beyond your own. You know, you kind of have to see other people's ignorance is their problem.
Yes, and I'm starting to see that more.
Yeah, and it's theirs. You don't have to be offended by it. You don't even have to take it serious. They're just projecting their ignorance. And if you're held hostage to stay inside that ignorance, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, no, but you don't have to own their ignorance either.
No, you can just see that they're ignorant and forgive them. Because ignorance is totally forgivable. Because you really don't know. And they don't know what they're doing when they're ignorant. They don't know they're assholes. Right? So yeah, I mean, honestly, if for you to get this freedom, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, means that your body is going to be that big, is there any honor in that? No, I want you to really think about this for a second. Put yourself in that scenario that you're afraid of. If for you to feel emotionally, spiritually, psychologically free from torturing yourself, from the abusiveness, if to get that freedom means that your body's going to be flawed and limited, doesn't that deserve some grace?
Yeah.
So if someone were to judge you and stigmatize you because physically you don't have what is, right, the facade or the fantasy, right? Let's just use your fiance. If he has a fantasy about his wife, what she's supposed to look like and how you're supposed to be presented with him, he might want you to go back in that cage, even if it causes psychological, spiritual, and emotional illness. Right?
But he has binge eating. He also binge eats. So, I mean...
Well, that's a sign right there. He's fantasizing. So keep that in mind, right? I'm going to say it again. Your fiance may be fantasizing and putting you in that fantasy role. And you're supposed to meet that fantasy expectation. And he might not give a shit that it's psychologically abusive to you. Right? And if that's the case, he's going to encourage you to go back into dieting. Even though you may have vocalized and voiced and spent money to get help. Right? He's going to say, yeah, dearie, you might want to cut out the carbs. Right? Because he's more concerned about his penis and his perception of how people perceive him. Right?
Well, he did tell me, he said, do whatever makes you happy.
Okay, so if that means that you become overweight, is he really, really, selflessly wanting you to be happy? Or is he wanting you to do what makes you feel good only if it benefits him and his fantasy? See, this is where you have to look at your relationship with him, and you got to be able to discern if he really loves you or if he really loves the fantasy of you.
Yes.
Big difference, right? Remember, the fantasy is in a vacuum. It doesn't include all of the destructiveness, the obsessiveness, the control, the force that's required to maintain it. And so if he's more concerned about the fantasy, similar to you and your thin supremacy, than he is your what it takes, you should let him go. You should let him eliminate himself. Right? That's hard to do. But in the end, do you really want to be with people who are fantasizing about you and putting you in a fantasy role? Think about that. Could you imagine if you were holding him to some fantasy role as a man? Think about that. Expecting him, let's just use he's supposed to be 6'5" and he's supposed to be only 3% body fat. And let's just imagine his hair is always going to be thick and luscious and amazing. And he's supposed to be able to fix your car. He's going to build your house. He's going to make $1 million every year.
No,
and imagine that you think he's inadequate because he just doesn't make the money he used to make.
I don't judge people on what they make, though.
I know that. What I'm doing is putting up a mirror for you to see, well, think about the expectation that he might be fantasizing about you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, what if you fantasized about him similarly?
I don't, but that makes me feel guilty that he's fantasizing that I'm supposed to be this thin, perfect person, and I can't give him that because that's not what makes me happy.
Well, you presented that to start the relationship, though.
I did.
So you have to own up to that.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of your recovery, it's very important that you let him know immediately that you're not going to play that role, that you are no longer going to be a fantasy. You're going to just be yourself. So that may mean that if you get married and have kids, you may end up being 50 pounds heavier the rest of your goddamn life. Right?
Just writing this all down because I have to, otherwise I'm not going to remember.
That's okay. That you don't want to be valued based on some fantasy ideal of what he thinks a wife is or what he thinks a woman should be. That it needs to be very clear that he's not fantasizing about you in his mind, because otherwise he's just going to feel like a victim based on your reality, right? Reality is very different than fantasy. So if you are being your real self, he may feel victimized by the fact that you're not providing the fantasy that he thought you would provide for him.
Oh, yeah, that's so true but we are both like that in the beginning. How we've both gained weight. So it's not just a one-sided thing.
I would agree. Because when you started the relationship with him, you were full of fantasies yourself. Right? The reality is that you're human beings who shit, who burp, who have, sweaty armpits, who are going to have children, who are going to have diseases, who may end up getting hurt, who's going to end up losing a job, who's going to have to move, who's not going to have money, who's not going to have the facade, who's not going to look like this, who's not going to stay healthy, who's not going to have a reality to where they can fixate and obsess on their body image the same way. I mean, you have so much life in front of you. Why create a fantasy that cannot exist in the future with reality in your way and coming and already existing? Right?
Oh, this is actually making me really emotional right now. I don't know why. It's just brought up a lot to think about.
Well, do you feel that am I being too aggressive?
No, not at all. It's actually, you're just being honest. Do you know what I mean? It's just now I have a lot of thoughts going through my mind about everything.
Yeah, when I married my husband, my current husband,
Mhm.
I thought he was going to convert to my religion. That was my fantasy, that I was going to somehow convince him and I would get him to convert
Now, what was that?
to the religion that I was raised in.
Oh, okay. And
That
what?
I married him, we eloped, and in my head, I had fantasized about the fact that I believed that I was powerful enough to manipulate him and to convince him into becoming the religion that I wanted him to be, so that I could achieve the high state of heavenness, right?
Mm.
And it sucked when I'd married him, and he was like, I'm never going to do that. I will walk away from this relationship right now because you need to know I'm never going to do that. Ever. Never.
Yeah.
Not for you, not for any parents, not for anybody. We'll never do that, Robin. And I was just like, shit. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But I love him. I want to be with him. So I had to really go into the fantasy of, do I really want to force someone to be something that they're not so that I can achieve a fantasy?
That they actually sound like very similar people. At least Pat would say something like that.
Right? Well, you know.
You're crazy, no.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and it was amazing to me that he was willing to leave the relationship, as much as we're still married. We're on our 20th year. We just celebrated our 19th anniversary. That we married under such terrible circumstances, such dysfunctional craziness. I was nuts at the time with my own mental illness, right? My own syndrome, body image syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're still together 3 kids later, and we've moved, like, I swear, over 20 times together. But anyways, it's like I had to remove all fantasy from my existence to recover. And that included the fantasy of marriage, the fantasy of the person I married. Like, I'm married to this person. This is who he is. This is where he's at. This is what he struggles with, what he's good at. And this is his real essence. And that's what I'm marrying. I'm not marrying something that I want him to become. That would be abusive. And I'd have to manipulate him the way I was manipulating my body to become the fantasy of what I thought the body should be. Right?
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah, so when you look at this relationship with yourself, you need to know yourself first. And then you need to have a pretty good, deep, profound conversation with the person you're about to marry, so that he is aware you're not going to meet a fantasy for him.
Mm-hmm.
That you're just going to be yourself. You're going to be in the body. That you can't do it anymore. Right?
Yeah.
And if he loves you, he'll be there. He won't. That's not why he's marrying you. If he doesn't, he might not want to be with you anymore.
Do you know that he proposed to me when I was at a little bit less than what I am now, which is what I would consider heavy for myself. But he proposed to me when I was sitting there. We were out in the bush having a couple beer. I was feeling fat in my bathing suit, like, oh, I better cover up my stomach, I don't look so good. And that's when he proposed, and I was like, oh my gosh, you just proposed when I feel the worst about myself, you know? And yeah, he was just like, I love you so much, these are all the reasons I love you, and this is why we're getting married. And I was like, oh my gosh, you do love me.
No, well, the problem may not be him at all. It may be your thin supremacy that's the problem.
I think it is.
Yeah.
And I didn't even tell him that I am working with you.
Oh.
He doesn't even know. He doesn't know that I watch your YouTube videos. He doesn't know that
He doesn't know that you have a varying degree of orthorexia and anorexia and exercise addiction. Doesn't know any of that?
No. No, because I put it under the health.
Yeah. See? Health righteousness. It usually works. Oh, yeah, I'm a marathon runner. I do triathlons. I'm just into CrossFit. Mm-hmm. It's so healthy. I'm taking care of myself. That's why I do it.
Yeah, and I think, like I mentioned before, he's just like, oh, I want you to be happy, whatever that is. And Now I kind of feel guilty that I never even told him I'm working with you.
Maybe you should come out of the closet.
I
Say,
think I should.
I used to be a thin supremacist, where thin people are superior, and I was putting him, you were probably putting him in a fantasy.
Oh, I probably did.
Okay.
To be in, total honesty there.
Hey, I had no problem admitting that I was fully marrying some man based on the fantasy I wanted him to fit.
Mm-hmm. But I don't fantasize about him in that way. I just fantasize that because I'm in it. It's me.
Yeah. I'm excited. This is a great conversation.
It's an eye opener.
Good. So go into what you're gonna do if you get fat and he sticks around.
Then that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that means that it's a relationship built on the heart, not the eyeballs and the mind. It's heart focused. Don't you want that to be the core of the relationship? The heart.
I think that's what everybody wants.
Yeah, I think so too. In terms of our humanity, that our heart is what we're truly seeking, but you got to seek it in the heart, not the mind. You can't get to the heart through the mind. It doesn't work. You get more mind, which is what you've been doing. So we went into the heart and said, live from this spot. It's so much more humble. Where's the pride? And now all of a sudden you're connecting with people who before you would have felt superior or inferior to. You no longer feel that way. So pressure's gone. Social anxiety should be gone. Issues with food have just poof, disappeared.
Totally.
It's pretty amazing. That's why I think this is a syndrome, not an illness. Right? If this was mental illness, and I know I refer to mental illness quite a bit because I know it's understandable to the listener, but it's really a syndrome. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this recovery. Like, poof, it's gone. An illness means it's conditioned. You would at least have the conditions that exist for a long time before they diminish. That's not the case. And the other thing is this would be something that medication would improve if it was an illness. And medication does not work with body image, eating disorders. It doesn't work. Are you on any antidepressants or anything like that? Anti-anxiety?
No, I used to, but I don't take anything anymore. I don't like it.
Well, tell me this. The relief that you've gotten through this work, is it equal to, better than, less than the results you got through medication?
Better. Way better.
Instantaneous, too. And it's real, because it's coming from your own ability to navigate in your brain. From the heart. That's the key.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this. Do you have anything you want to say to the listener?
No, not really. Just that it's so much. I feel so much more relief doing what I'm doing now, working with you, than I ever did before. It's just changed my whole outlook.
What is the difference?
Switch. Everything's different. Like I said, I don't have a hobby anymore that.
What was different in terms of why this time around it is working?
Because I'm actually seeing what a whole farce, all of that whole circle around health and fitness and that whole bubble, it's not real.
It's a cult. It's a subculture. It's very bizarre. When you get out of it, you can see it. When you're in it, it's hard to see.
Exactly.
You just knew you were suffering and you wanted out. So we took you out, and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit. That is crazy.
It
and
is.
People inside are very self-righteous about it. They really feel uppity in themselves, right? As they walk around and take their selfies and look at their bodies, right? And say, I'm healthy.
But you're not.
I know. You're not. Even if you're pretending to be, even if you say you're healthier than you were before, it's all an illusion, isn't it?
It's an optical illusion.
All right. Well, Thanks for... Go ahead.
Oh, and mental, too.
Uh-huh. It's fantasy. You're living in some fantasy world.
So true.
All right, thanks for letting me share this.
Yeah, no worries.